Am I the antagonist for a misunderstanding that happened just before my partner went for surgery? For some reason, I, 33-year-old female, am having difficulty moving on from a misunderstanding between the nurse, my partner, 36-year-old male, and me that happened right as he was being taken to surgery. To provide context, this was a planned surgery to remove some hardware from a previous injury. Naturally, I wanted to be there for him, so I took the day off to accompany him to the hospital. Any surgery is a significant event, and he has every right to be worried. As his partner and someone who loves him deeply, I was naturally concerned as well, but I chose not to express it in order to avoid adding to his anxiety. In any case, we arrived at the hospital with plenty of time. We were waiting in the theater submission room, as instructed, when the nurse came out and called my partner's name. Suddenly, he stood up. The nurse said something to me about going to the end of the corridor. It's important to note that I am hard of hearing and use hearing aids. This caused me to panic a little because they were taking him away, and I couldn't understand what the nurse was saying due to her strong accent and my hearing difficulties. So I asked where I was supposed to go. She replied that I could either wait at the end of the corridor or go home, and they would call me when he's done. I replied, "But you don't have my number?" At that point, my partner scolded me. I can't recall exactly what he said, but he believed I was being rude to the nurse. I can be straightforward at times, but I truly had no intention of being rude. I deeply respect anyone who works in a hospital. He accused me of acting as if they were incompetent and didn't know what they were doing. In hindsight, it was completely reasonable for him to provide them with my number. I was simply panicking, and the whole interaction lasted no more than a minute. Then he was whisked away, giving me a stern peck on the cheek before leaving, clearly annoyed. He later messaged me on WhatsApp saying you were very rude. That was our last interaction until 3 hours later when he was wheeled back to the ward. At that point he shouted, "Who let you in here?" and informed the nurses that I'm a tyrant. He then asked me why I came back. I was perfectly fine with his behavior in that moment because I understood that anesthesia can make people act strangely. Am I the asshole? Am I the antagonist for being upset about feeling misunderstood? I don't know why I'm having such a hard time letting this go. My partner has forgiven me but maintains that I was in the wrong. He becomes extremely angry if I bring it up and has recently even told me that he is disgusted by me for wanting to discuss it again. I just want him to understand why I was thinking that way. It seems like there have been many other instances where my feelings were not acknowledged, but he is the one who underwent surgery. I do feel like I must be the jerk for allowing this to bother me at all. Just to note, I did apologize to the nurse because my partner believed I was rude, and I have been taking excellent care of him. However, I don't feel like the issue has been fully resolved. Nevertheless, I have no intention of ever bringing it up again. I just need to let it go. It is completely understandable that you were feeling panicked and confused during that moment. Your partner should have been more understanding and supportive, especially since you mentioned that you are hard of hearing and have difficulty understanding accents. You didn't intend to be rude to the nurse, and even apologized to her afterwards. Your partner's response, particularly his angry outbursts and insults, are uncalled for and disrespectful. You deserve to have your feelings validated, and it's not fair for your partner to dismiss them or make you feel like you're overreacting. It's important for him to understand how his words and actions have affected you. You may want to consider having a calm and honest conversation with him when he's in a better state of mind to address this issue and express how you feel. Overall, you are not the asshole in this situation. It's important for partners to support and understand each other, especially during times of stress and anxiety. Am I the antagonist for asking our nanny to stop making herself at home in our house? We have a nanny who comes to look after my little ones, age 2 and 4, 3 times a week. She arrives in the morning when I leave for work, 8 a.m., and leaves when either my husband or I get home, 5, 6 p.m. She's been quite good with the kids, which is fine. However, the only problem is she's making herself at home too much in my opinion. The first issue is that she'll randomly leave things at our place overnight, like a coat or a car seat. Sometimes she even puts small bits of food in our fridge and leaves them overnight when she's coming the next day. But what bothers me the most is the dogs. She has 2 dogs, one is a chocolate Labrador and the other is a Great Dane. I don't like dogs, and initially, I told her she couldn't bring them with her when she asked. However, one day she had to bring them because her garden was being landscaped, so I let her, but told her to keep them outside. Well, since then she's been persistently bringing them. I didn't say anything because I thought it wasn't a big deal and not worth the hassle. Gradually, she's allowing them to get away with more. At first, she tied them up to the fence, but then she started letting them run free in the yard. Then, once when it was raining, she called me and asked if it was okay for them to come inside the house for a bit and stay in the kitchen. And now they have free reign. It's specifically regarding the dogs that I feel she's just making herself too much at home. I'll find random chewed up tennis balls in the yard, and she's set up a couple of metal bowls near the back door. The other day, I found a bag of dog treats in the pantry that I assume are hers. Perhaps the worst of all is that she obviously takes them out to do their business and then bags the poop. However, she leaves the poop bags by the front door next to her handbag and dog leashes. So I usually come home to a few of these bright green bags of her dog's poop at my front door. It's just so gross. I want to talk to her about these things, but my husband is telling me not to. He's saying that we need her to look after the kids, and it would be offensive to ask her to stop. He thinks they're just minor issues and not worth worrying about because we'll only need her until the kids are school age anyway. He's quite serious, and it has caused us to argue quite a bit. Would I be the antagonist for telling her to stop making herself so comfortable? I feel like she has gradually integrated herself into our household without us realizing it. While it's important to appreciate her help with the kids, it's also essential to set boundaries. Leaving personal items overnight, storing food in your fridge, and letting her dogs roam freely in your yard are all crossing boundaries. Communicate your concerns calmly and assertively to the nanny. Let her know that while you appreciate her help, you would like to establish some boundaries regarding her personal items and dogs. It's important for her to respect your home and your preferences, and it's perfectly reasonable for you to voice your discomfort. Your husband's argument about not wanting to offend her because you need her for the kids is understandable, but it's also important to address the issue before it becomes a bigger problem. Open communication can help avoid misunderstandings and resentment. Am I the antagonist for calling the non-emergency line on my neighbor's kid? I, a 25-year-old female, currently reside in a recently constructed and quite luxurious apartment complex, which is still in the process of filling up with tenants. I am a pet owner and frequently take my dog for walks, which occasionally leads to interactions with my neighbors. One of my neighbors, who goes by the name Becca, and I have had a few conversations while I was out with my dog. However, aside from those casual encounters, we do not really have much of a relationship. Becca also happens to have a shy daughter, whose name I never pushed for. Let's refer to her as Sarah. I've only seen Sarah about half the times I've seen Becca. Yesterday, Becca paid me a visit at my door and asked if I could look after Sarah for the day, as she had a meeting in a larger town about 2 hours away. I declined her request. When she inquired about the reason, I explained that I have attention deficit disorder, ADD, and would be too engrossed in my work to properly care for Sarah. Becca attempted to persuade me by saying that her daughter would remain quiet and simply watch TV throughout the day. As a side note, the actual reason behind my refusal to watch the child is that I feel socially awkward around adults, and especially so around children, as neither of us can accurately interpret social cues. Additionally, I have experienced some negative effects from being placed in a parental role during my own troubled childhood, so I'm generally uncomfortable around kids. Lastly, I meticulously plan out my daily activities before even getting out of bed, and having a child disrupt those plans would ruin my entire day. Regardless, I maintained my stance and shut the door before returning to work. However, about an hour later, I went out to walk my dog and found Sarah sitting outside my door. She informed me that her mom had told her that I would be looking after her for the day. While I may come across as somewhat heartless, I do actually like children, albeit with some awkwardness. Considering this, I allowed Sarah to come into my apartment on the condition that she would wash her hands, as I noticed some residue on them, and then she could sit on my couch. While out walking my dog, I contacted the non-emergency line and reported that my neighbor had left her child at my apartment. Unfortunately, due to the underfunding of police services in my city, they informed me that it would take some time before an officer could be sent, as the child was currently safe. Upon returning to my apartment, I engaged in a lengthy conversation with the 7-year-old, approximately, about dogs, and then we baked cookies together before the police arrived to gather statements from both of us. They reassured her that it was not her fault and offered words of support. It was discovered through their inquiries that Becca has 2 mothers, and as a result, they decided to take her to the other parent. Later that night, Becca came to my door, furiously banging on it until I opened. She proceeded to yell at me. Due to my past experiences, I am somewhat accustomed to older women yelling at me, so I simply detached myself emotionally from the situation. I responded with a neutral tone, saying okay at appropriate moments, until one of the apartment staff members intervened and convinced her to back off. Now I find myself questioning whether social norms dictate that I should have taken care of Sarah despite initially declining the request, making me the one in the wrong for involving the police. Someone else in the complex even went as far as taping a note to my door, criticizing me for breaking up a family and ruining the mom's life, while also labeling me as a terrible person. You are not obligated to take care of someone else's child, especially when it was not prearranged or discussed beforehand. You had valid reasons for not wanting to watch Sarah, and it's not fair for Becca to assume that you would agree to take care of her without any prior agreement. Calling the non-emergency line was the right thing to do in this situation, as you were concerned for the well-being of the child who was left unattended. It's understandable that the police response might have taken some time due to underfunding, but it was important to ensure that Sarah was safe. Becca's reaction was inappropriate and unjustified. Yelling at you for potentially saving her child from a dangerous situation is unacceptable. It seems like Becca was the one who made a poor parenting decision by leaving her child with you without any consent or arrangement. The note criticizing you is also uncalled for. You did not break up a family. You acted in the best interest of the child's safety. It's important to prioritize the well-being of a child over social expectations or opinions. In conclusion, you are not the AH in this situation. You made a responsible decision by calling the authorities, and Becca's reaction was unwarranted. Am I the antagonist for making a TikTok that somewhat exposed my influencer parents? I am currently banished to my aunt's house, and while she agrees with me that I'm not an asshole for having these feelings, she agrees with my parents that I was an asshole for the TikTok I made about our real lives. Without giving too much away, my parents had me while they were in college, and I lived with my grandparents until they graduated and got married. I have 3 younger siblings, and we all live together in a large city. My dad has a regular job, but my mom mostly writes a blog and has social media accounts. Surprisingly, she never mentions me and I'm never included in any pictures. On the other hand, my siblings are constantly written about from the moment my mom was pregnant with them after they got married. She often writes about our lifestyle and boasts about how thrifty and simplistic we are, but fails to mention that my grandparents give us money and she spends it on ridiculously expensive items like buckets and sweaters. Believe me when I say that almost everything you see online about my family is false, except for our location and our names. Anyway, I vented a bit to my friend about how my parents constantly switch between pretending to be poor and then not, depending on who they're talking to. I mentioned that sometimes this means my mom buys something expensive just to show off. But then I have to hear about cutting back and being more simple when it comes to birthday wish lists, because life is too expensive. So we made a TikTok at my house. I showed some things like, here's my mom's one sweater that cost $400, which is why I got this cheap art set for Christmas. And I also pointed out that some items she claimed were gifts were actually her own purchases. My TikTok didn't receive much attention, but one of my friends showed it to her mom, who then showed it to my mom. Now my parents are angry and claim that my actions are hurting the entire family because it might affect sponsorships and potential book deals. My dad even called me an asshole for making the video. So am I really in the wrong here? I believe I have the right to share the truth, but maybe I should have kept it more private between myself and my friends. By the way, my parents forced me to delete the account so no one else will find out. Thank you. Update, I want to thank everyone who voted. I showed this post to my aunt earlier this morning, and she's somewhat upset that I made it. I won't be responding to any further comments. I apologize! My aunt and grandparents are going to help me inquire if it's possible for me to stay with my aunt for a while, maybe even until I turn 18. I can answer a few questions that I received repeatedly, but I truly don't want to expose my family, because I'm a part of them, and my siblings are young and don't deserve it. Also, I don't want more people figuring out who my parents are. No, my parents are not Christian vloggers. They don't have a YouTube or any other social media accounts besides my mom's old blog and Instagram. Her blog and some side projects from it do generate income. My grandparents are aware of how the money is spent because they see it in our house, on the blog, and on Instagram. Yes, my mom really did buy a $300 bucket from England. And then she wears our house key on a rubber band on her wrist, all while telling her followers about our simple life. It's instances like these that feel dishonest. Her followers even send her pictures of themselves buying the same ridiculous bucket and donating their key rings using a rubber band in the same way. It's absolutely absurd. It appears that you were frustrated with your parents' behavior and the inconsistency between their online persona and the reality of your family's lifestyle. Venting to your friend and making the video was an expression of your feelings and not necessarily intended to harm your family's reputation. However, it might have been more appropriate to keep your frustrations private between you and your friends rather than publicly posting it online. Considering the potential consequences mentioned by your parents, such as affecting sponsorships and book deals, it's understandable they are upset. In any case, it's positive that you have the support of your aunt, who recognizes your feelings but also encourages you to handle the situation in a more appropriate manner. It might be beneficial to have a calm and open conversation with your parents about your feelings and concerns without involving social media. Communication can help address the issues and maybe even improve the overall family dynamics. Am I the antagonist for refusing to give my stuffed animal to a baby? I, a 31-year-old female, frequently travel by bus to visit my fiancé in France before we ultimately settle down together next year. However, this becomes complicated as I suffer from several psychological disorders, including schizophrenia, Tourette's, and various social phobias, including a fear of babies. To manage my conditions, I always carry my medication, noise-canceling headphones, and a small stuffed animal, a little fox that helps me stay calm during any crises that may arise. Today, I embarked on an 8-hour bus journey from Paris to Belgium to return home. I made sure to bring everything I needed, reassuring myself that it would be no problem. However, an issue arose when a toddler and her mother boarded the bus. As someone who finds it incredibly difficult to bear the screams and cries of children, I empathize with the baby's discomfort. I turn up the volume on my headphones a bit, trying to distance myself from the commotion. Unfortunately, the child becomes increasingly agitated and begins to scream louder. From what I gather, her mother is unable to change her full diaper, despite the driver's offer to stop at the nearest rest area for the necessary care. This is the moment when I might potentially act like a jerk. Remember the stuffed fox I mentioned earlier? Its name is Bidouille, by the way. I take her with me to the bus restroom, temporarily tuck her into my t-shirt, and then secure her to my belt until I return to my seat. However, the little girl's cries escalate, sounding as though something has been broken. Even I, who typically fears children, start to wonder. I retrieve Bidui and glance out the window when the child's mother approaches, asking if she can have her. Apparently, her daughter has become fixated on the toy and is having a tantrum. Initially, I'm taken aback and refuse to give up Bidui. I question whether the mother would willingly give up her child's toy to soothe someone else's tantrum or tears. She admits that she wouldn't, stating that her daughter wants it and won't stop crying until she gets it. She suggests that I simply buy a new one. As she clings to Bidui, I fear that the toy may be damaged. Filled with anger and anxiety, I stand up and address the mother, expressing that if she cannot handle an 8-hour bus journey with her toddler, she should reconsider her choices. I remind her of what the driver mentioned earlier. In the end, I reclaim my plushie and advise her to better organize herself, not assuming that her daughter will automatically receive whatever she points at while crying, especially if it belongs to someone else. This is even more important considering the owner has mental disorders like me. In response, she calls me a racist and an effing goth before returning to her seat. So, am I the jerk in this situation? You have a medical condition that makes it difficult for you to cope with certain stimuli, such as the screams and cries of a child. You made an effort to mitigate the noise by turning up your headset volume. Bringing along your stuffed animal is also a coping mechanism for you. When the mother approached you and asked for your stuffed animal to calm her child, you politely declined, highlighting that you wouldn't give up something that helps you manage your own mental health. It is not unreasonable for you to prioritize your own well-being in this situation. However, it is important to note that escalating the situation by getting up from your seat, making comments about her ability to handle the journey, and taking your plushie back could be seen as confrontational. It may have been better to calmly explain your situation and remind her again of the driver's assurance that they would stop for necessary care. Overall, considering your medical condition and the efforts you made to accommodate the noise, it can be said that you are not the asshole in this situation. Am I the antagonist for yelling at my autistic cousin and causing her to have a meltdown? I am a 16-year-old female, and my cousin, who is 17 years old and female, is autistic. For as long as I can remember, my family has treated her with special care, excusing any misbehavior and attributing it to her autism. She has always sought attention, often doing something attention-seeking whenever someone else experiences something exciting or upsetting. For instance, on my 12th birthday, right when everyone was singing happy birthday to me, she started crying, claiming that I had been mean to her earlier and she wanted to go home. I tried explaining to my mom that this wasn't true as I hadn't interacted much with her that day, but my mom instantly defended her, stating she would never lie. Over the years, I've become accustomed to her behavior and typically just roll my eyes and move on because there's nothing I can do. Last Saturday, my family gathered at my house. During our conversation, my 15-year-old brother suddenly fainted, causing everyone to panic and rush to help him. After a few minutes, he regained consciousness but was still disoriented. Everyone was concerned about his well-being and trying to figure out what caused it when my cousin started crying, talking about how scared she was and criticizing our family for panicking, saying they frightened her. Immediately, all the attention shifted to her, and my brother even tried to go check on her. He almost fainted again when he attempted to stand up. I had to grab onto him to prevent him from collapsing, but nobody noticed because everyone was focused on my cousin. This really angered me. My cousin was once again stealing all the attention, but this time it wasn't just on a special occasion, it was during a serious medical situation. I yelled at her, expressing how my brother could have been seriously hurt and how she was, as usual, demanding all the attention and making everything about herself. This made her cry even harder, leading to a complete meltdown, and my mother had to practically drag me out of the room. Now almost my entire family is mad at me, except for my grandma, brother, and other cousin. Initially, I believed I was justified, but now I'm uncertain. I may have spoken out of worry, and I feel like I should have stayed silent because I really upset her. What do you think? Am I the asshole? It is understandable that you have been frustrated with your cousin's attention-seeking behavior over the years. However, it might have been more productive to address this issue with your parents or another adult in a calm manner rather than yelling at your cousin during a serious medical situation. It is important to keep in mind that your cousin's actions might be a result of her autism, and she may not fully understand the impact of her behavior on others. Nonetheless, it is important for your family to find a balance between acknowledging your cousin's needs and giving attention to others, especially in more critical situations like the one with your brother. Thanks for watching. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications so you never miss a video. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist in the description.